How does marketing survive in a future with no ad IDs? Hello and welcome to Unscripted, the future of growth with Inmobi. My name is John Koetsier. The challenge is pretty clear. IDFA, it's pretty scarce today, and GAID will be extinct in 2024 most likely. Third-party cookies eventually, at some point, are going to die. What's left? There's so many questions for so many aspects of performance marketing: targeting, audiences, campaign optimization, measurement, return on ad spend, cohorts, all this stuff. What will it all look like? How will marketers be able to do their jobs? Is everything just going to suck? Jess, let's start with you. What's the most urgent problem to solve for in an identifier-free world?
I mean, can I just say the general word of privacy? It really is consumer trust. I would say that consumer data is the oxygen for businesses to expand their top line growth, and it is digital gold. So we have to figure out how to capitalize and I guess, sort of extrapolate on consumer trust in a way that doesn't violate the consumer, but in a way that helps to continue to drive the economy that we're all participating in, which is, ad tech, martech, and media.
Yeah, digital gold, digital oil. We've heard those comparisons, and we're kind of running out in some sense. Todd, your perspective, what's the most urgent problem to solve for?
Yeah, Jess answered it from the consumer side, so I'll answer it from the business side. An old adage that I subscribe to that I've heard is professionals start with attribution and the amateurs start with targeting. And so I think the most important problems to solve for businesses is, how do I measure the effectiveness of my advertising, and work your way back from that end result to what are the targeting solutions that you can use to achieve those results. So really it's measurement and attribution.
Interesting. I love it. The one rub, of course, if you start with attribution, is you've got to spread a lot of cash around a lot of places to find that audience, right?
Absolutely. That's why it's going to take a portfolio approach. I think we'll dive into that as this discussion goes on, but there isn't going to be a one size fits all panacea solution for marketers in this new world. There's going to be different solutions. You mentioned some of these up front. One-to-one targeting where it's available, cohort-based solutions, contextual solutions, and brands and marketers are going to have to experiment, take a test and learn approach to see what works best to achieve their campaign ROAS goals.
And Jess, Todd says there's no easy button. How are brands going to adapt?
Yeah, it's a interesting question, and I think every brand is going to pivot a little bit differently. So your CPGs are going to look very different from those that operate in retail or telco, or even like the financial and healthcare sector. So it really just depends. The way that we're approaching it is at least the way that our team is approaching it is we focus less on the tech stacks and the data stacks, and we really focus on the use cases. And then we back those use cases into what are the business and technical requirements, and then we build out the solutions for that. And so the way that I think about it and what I tell my clients all the time is I can sell you every piece of technology in the world that promises to solve for cookie deprecation and signal loss and consumer privacy trust. But if you don't actually have the stakeholder buy-in across, your DPO organizations and your marketing IT organizations, as well as analytics and engineering and marketing, it's not going to work. So you need, I hate to use the phrase organizational excellence, but if you don't have that center of excellence, if you don't have the processes, the resources, particularly the human capital, and you don't have the strategies, all of that falls apart because the tech only brings you so far. And so I think, that's really what we're trying to focus on is what are the challenges that we're trying to solve for, both with the right side and the left side of paid and owned, and then how do those ladder back up into, the digital transformation type of conversations that the CFO and the CEO cares about. And then we start having those conversations about what do you actually need to do and how do we federate that across your business.
Todd, if that's how brands in general need to react, need to start adapting, what does that say about marketers' role and how marketers' role will change?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll answer that directly, but I think Jess is onto it in terms of simplifying for the marketer. They don't need to have this litany of tech solutions thrown at them for them to operationalize and build on their side. Part of the job on our side as vendors is to make these different technologies work seamlessly in a way that a marketer can come to us and say, these are my goals. And we will stitch together the solutions on the back end and create the so-called easy button, if you will, for them. The easy button is tell me what you want to accomplish, and we will stitch together the solutions to make that happen. So a little bit will have to happen on their side, on our side to make that happen. For marketers, they will certainly have to understand how does each of those different tactics translate into measurement or into metrics that they can then stitch together in a meaningful way and compare on an apples to apples basis.
What are some of the critical technologies that you see brands and marketers needing to use, adopt, or at least gain access to in order to navigate their way through a world without ad IDs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one fundamentally is like a consent management platform, right? Which nobody in marketing ever talks about. I think like maybe, and I might quote this wrong, but under a third of the publishers in the ecosystem actually have one. And we're starting to get a lot of requests from our clients to say, can you validate for me the partners and platforms I run with are actually adhering to GDPR, CCPA, all the other state fragment laws that are in place? Like, how are they actually approaching privacy outside of, IAB's TCF string, especially for our global clients? Outside of that, I think people think about identity in a very interesting and siloed way. So everyone thinks about identity over here in the paid ecosystem. I need identity and I need UIDs and ramp IDs and core IDs because I need to target deterministic audiences. But I think that they're failing to understand that identity actually is a unification strategy, a hygiene strategy, a validation strategy, an enrichment strategy that encompasses your entire business. And if you don't actually natively embed that in everything you do, and then federate that across the entire ecosystem of your internal tech, you don't have a chance at even trying to target anybody over here in the paid ecosystem. So it really starts with getting your house in order back in the data assets that you do have. And if you don't have any data assets, what are the data sets you want to license and proxy as your own first party data sets as a CPG? Or how do you want to use identity to actually structure, partner alliances across an interoperable clean room strategy? And so that would sort of be like my first thing outside of the consent piece. And then I think the next thing, if we're talking specifically about media, is probably, I'm going to say at the current moment, privacy safe APIs, and shortly thereafter is going to be a clean room. And I'm not going to say you necessarily need to invest in an enterprise clean room right now, but you really need to start thinking about what your clean room strategy is, because to Todd's point, any level of optimization, any level of attribution, any level of insights, none of these platforms are going to give you any row level data. All of that's going to be done in their four walls. And so you are going to have to be comfortable logging in to a cloud-based or built clean room inside of these platforms to do those activities to measure your efficacy. So that's kind of how I would prioritize that.
And clean rooms are important where you have identity, right? And that's the key. You talked about getting their houses in order, but the reality is, unless you are collecting as a publisher, unless you are authenticating users and collecting authentication information, namely a hashed email, you won't have those signals, right? So you have to earn, first of all, as a publisher, you have to earn the right to ask the consumer for that information. You have to have an experience that lends itself to authentication or to collecting that data in some form of exchange. Candidly, there's a lot of publishers out there. We're not talking about the big ones, the New York Times, those are the world, the ones we talk about every day, right, that are cited in the media. They have that login experience, and they can collect that information on a large number of their users. But there's a whole torso and long tail of apps that haven't earned that right to collect consumer information, but still provide a valuable service. Whether that's a simple gaming app that's helping somebody fill their free time, or a weather app that somebody's using on a one-off basis, they're not going to get that login information, right? And so all of these solutions around authenticated users and clean rooms become less relevant and less viable to them. And hence why I talk about portfolio-based solutions. You're going to have to use other solutions. This is one of the reasons why we are looking at cohort-based solutions like SDAs, contextual-based solutions that help those publishers get some level of signal to help them enable marketers to drive more targeted campaigns on their platforms.
So Jess just casually tossed a couple thought grenades in there and walked away. And I have to go back to what you were talking about.
As I usually do.
I know. Horrific. Consent management platforms. That's a massive grenade. That's a like, whoa, who has that? How big do you have to be to have that? Todd, your comments about the torso and long tail really apply there. There's a reason why we see login with Google on, every third site that you go to these days, right? I want to talk about something. You mentioned seller-defined audiences, Todd, and Jess, you talked about identity. Is there such a thing as degrees of identity? Because Jess, you talked about enriching with identity. You may not know that person is Joe Smith who lives here and is in that state and bought this, but you know a few things demographically, other things. Are there degrees of this?
There's a reason we actually use the term addressability instead of identity to talk about the overall strategy here. Identity really implies understanding an individual, who they are, not necessarily personally identifiable information, but narrowing them down to a consistent user entity over time against which you attribute characteristics or intent. But addressability is a larger concept of which identity is a subset. Addressability means some level of signal that lets you tailor or personalize a message to some degree. So Contextual Solution is an addressability solution. You can infer something about the user based on the site that they are visiting or the app that they are using. It is probably the least granular in terms of, or the least fidelity to any given individual user, because you're treating every user of an app or a site or a URL as essentially being the same with a contextual solution. You get the most scale there, but the least fidelity to that user signal. Go up the stack, if you will, or up the pyramid, as we like to talk about it. You get to cohort-based solutions where you can treat groups of audiences alike, but at a more precise level of granularity than you would at an app level, all the way up to the top of the pyramid where you have a consented identifier for a user. You can still target one-to-one the same way that we've traditionally done up until the deprecation of cookies and maids.
So I was going
That
to
is
answer that
super
with
helpful.
I was going to answer that with a pyramid as well. So I feel like Todd, you might have stole that one from me.
Now
But
you have to use a cube. I mean, it's the
I know. No, I mean, everyone kind of thinks about things, I think, as an addressability pyramid. I want to say Joanna O'Connell first brought that to bear, but I think that the way we think about the pyramid a little bit differently. And so I don't consider all the tactics in the pyramid addressable. We call it addressable reachability, or I guess maybe that's just what my team calls it. And I'll do top down, and so the top down is that very deterministic, but again, it scales at what, maybe 5-10% of your campaign. And then that second part, and that's the brand's first party audiences. And then the second part is really the seller defined audiences, or it's using the first party data of the brand to inform through somebody like a permutive high impact inventory, but never actually using the audiences themselves, or using a brand's audience within a multi-tenant clean room environment to inform second party audiences that live in a publisher or a platform ecosystem. So you're not just shooting in the dark with your prospecting. And so you're pre-qualifying the audiences. The piece that I really like is AI for ads, which is actually a Google term, but that I couldn't really find a better way to say. We have a tool called Decision Science Framework, which we call DSF, but it's really just an amalgamation of machine learning, AI, and NLP. And I mean, every DSP has a flavor of it. You know, you've got Distillery as a flavor of it. Trade Desk has Koa. You've got your indies out there that have it. I personally think ours is a little bit different because we use the custom algos to bring in the first party signal from the brand to inform the actual buying. So we're not just buying on user propensity, we're buying on DSP and impression IDs as well. And then we're also looking at like brand affinity scores. And we're trying to actually build that into our OS planning tool so that it can be front to back, and then look at the conversion APIs to bring data into the walled gardens, but lift the aggregate data out of the walled gardens and bring that back into a clean room environment where you can sit predictive analytics on top of it, and then do more of an informed identity-based MMA type of model, or do like a time series analysis of the media KPIs to the business KPIs and make MMM a little bit more influential. And so I really like that like middle piece because it can sit on a global media data lake, or it can sit on labeled data in a data warehouse, or it can sit in a CDP. It can sit anywhere, right? It's totally data agnostic. It can sit on ad logs, and it can find feature sets and audiences and triggers to put value in front of a customer to give you PII. And then below that, you have the contextual piece, right? So it's all the stuff that Todd was talking about that can be data informed, or it can just be taxonomy informed. And then you have your high impact stuff. So I think where we're going to live and where a lot of media is going to live is in that AI piece. But that's where the data ethics stuff comes in too. So that's, if you take it back to the CMP piece, 2% of your assets introduce 98% of your risk. If you are doing everything by hand, that's not very smart, because you could potentially be putting assets in there that are introducing a whole ton of risk, right? So you really need to have it. There is some linear thinking there that we have to kind of go through, right? So in any event, that's how I'm thinking about it, which I know you wanted to go on to the next question, but I couldn't stop myself.
I was going to say, I think there's an interesting point about the machine learning and AI for targeting. I think what you're finding is, in this idealist world, that what we would traditionally have cited as a technology for optimization is actually becoming the currency for targeting.
Totally.
So that the lines between targeting and optimization are blurring, right? That signal that you're taking in based on, those impression IDs and all of the data you're getting on responsiveness to ads is being used to then model who you go after. So it's less about starting with a predefined audience and finding the audience through machine learning and iterating on that. That we would have traditionally called optimization. that's becoming the new targeting. And you're seeing, the big boys are investing in this. Facebook talks about this all the time. They're replacing audiences with machine learning based algorithms. Some call it AI. This is where it gets really interesting. Is it really AI or is it machine learning, depending on how they implement it? And that will actually, from a privacy perspective, be a really important distinction, because AI, you're starting to collect, like you said. I think what you're implying, Jess, is you're now pulling data in from users that's almost impossible to pull out of the systems and to manage consent on. So it creates a massive amount of risk. But if you are using machine learning on sort of consented signals or signals that don't require consent, call it consentless signals, then you're in a little bit safer place. So I think brands are going to have to navigate to what extent they're really using machine learning versus what's truly AI in these strategies.
So I'm going to call a quick timeout for marketers who are listening, and this is amazing stuff. And if the last 7 to 9 minutes was science, Greek, blah, blah, science, Greek, I didn't understand it, I'll turn us back to like maybe 15 minutes ago where I said, ad tech will solve it all. You guys will manage it. You guys will take care of it. You guys will figure it out, and marketers can come and do their jobs. They can understand their product. They can understand their audience. They can understand their potential customers or potential users, players, whatever it might be. And then they can say, hey, help me connect.
Honestly, it comes down to good creative. So maybe it's not ad creative agencies. Put good creative in front of them. Make sure there's a place they can give you information. There you go.
Okay, ID-less world, how is a marketer doing measurement, doing attribution? Is it Scan Privacy Sandbox? Is it Scan Privacy Sandbox Plus Plus? What is it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a lot still needs to be fleshed out. But as we see it right now, Scan and Google's attribution API as part of Privacy Sandbox are going to be the default easy options for a lot of folks. Right. And just
I just want to call out here that Todd said Scan is easy and Privacy Sandbox is easy. Okay, go ahead.
They're the easy buttons in the sense that they're easiest to implement, right?
Yes.
And default, those big platforms will have the signals to inform attribution. So it's an easy fallback option.
Yeah.
That said, that's not going to be sufficient for everybody, right? CPG brands will want to have a little bit more granularity into what's actually driving sales. So I think part of this goes back to Jess's point: get your house in order where you have the data, where you have individual level data, can tie that to sales transaction data. You'll want to do that, and you'll want to make sure you have authenticated user information that can be matched across marketer and publisher data assets. To get that signal on as large of an audience as you can. There's going to be machine learning extrapolating from that small subset of consented users to the larger audience, and now turning those insights into signals that can be extrapolated across non-consented users. So I think there's going to be a lot of that, a lot more willingness of marketers to make decisions based on a smaller subset of users than they previously worked with. A lot of marketers will find that to be more valuable than relying on the walled garden solutions, which are going to be a total black box, and they'll see what's working, but they won't necessarily understand the why.
I like that answer. And one of the ways I refer to that myself is looking for things that are truthy versus the truth. You may not get the absolute exact, this is what's happening 100% for every marketing dollar and every conversion, but you find something that is truthy. You look for how well it works versus if it's 97 or 99% accurate. Jess, your thoughts on measurement?
So this is a really big point for us right now. And I think there's a couple of different things. Like, I actually would say that I don't think Scan and PCM are that easy to implement. I think you kind of need an MMP or mobile measurement partner to do it. And we have a couple of preferred ones we work with. And I see those as campaign optimization tactics because of some of the limitations. Now, I know with some of the new releases of iOS 16, you have less limitations within those. And I am by no means as much of a mobile expert as Todd is. And so I, follow, I think it's Eric Seifert's blog, and I try to keep up with his brain. But, I do know that like as Apple is maturing in their approach to scan and PCM and some of those privacy regime frameworks, there are some more flexibilities in terms of, measuring view throughs and things like that. So we look at that as a data point in a larger model, but to use that for specific campaign tactic level optimizations. Now, when you look at omni-channel, because we're trying to look at things from an omni-channel perspective, that gets really tough. So I sit on like the IAB committee where we're reviewing a lot of the proposals for interoperability for clean rooms. And I actually think that will probably end up being the solve for it if everyone will participate. I just don't know if you're actually going to get the platforms that carry the most amount of weight to participate in a way that actually is useful, unless policymakers dictate that. And we're going a little bit in that direction. So the technology is there with like the Samuas and the Habus of the world, but I don't know if the willingness is there. So what we're looking to do, again, is we bring the first party data in a very privacy safe way. And then what comes out are the specific data points. We're looking at attention metrics. We're looking at viewability. We're looking at, unfortunately, click-through. We're looking at the PCM. We're looking at the scan. We're looking at everything. And then what we're actually building under a gentleman named Scott Hagedorn, who's our chief solutions architect, is a cloud environment that looks at the deterioration to actually try to mitigate I guess like loss of multiple revenue streams so that we can optimize all at once, right? So we're looking at audience performance, media performance, and creative performance so we can look at diminishing returns. And we're using all of those signals because all of the data sits on the cloud. So it's kind of like a mini cloud, like multi-cloud strategy, mini global data lake type of situation. And we're trying to actually replicate that for the clients. Now, if you have identity built into that, you can, to Todd's point, extrapolate on that, the location signals that you can bring in, all that stuff. So I am not a data science. I barely passed math in college, but like I believe that there's very smart people who can then put predictive analytics modeling on top of that sit on our Sapient side, who are starting to build these things and say, okay, based off of all of these different KPIs and data points that sit in this big Snowflake environment or AWS environment, this is what we're starting to see. This is where we see the diminishing returns. So go and invest here, don't invest here. But to your point, it's truthy, not truth. And a lot of it's based on like incrementality testing. And it's all very client centric. So there are these two new buzz terms that we're using a lot, which is value-based bidding and value-centric measurement. And it's all around client lifetime value. And that's why if you don't have your first party data in there because you can't use it, this all becomes so much more difficult because you can't map any of those data points I just talked about back to the digital gold that we talked about when we first started.
I love that, Jess. And I call that the everything, everywhere, all at once theory of measurement, because you don't have something. What's that?
Have you ever seen it work?
I think we're starting to figure out how it works. Yes. And I have seen examples of it starting to work. And I think that that's essential as we've lost what we collectively imagined were our true north signals, whether those were cookies, whether those were IDFAs, whether those are GAIDs. And we took that because we thought that that was deterministic and real and hard and solid and factual. And we based so much on that, even while we kind of closed our eyes to the fact that, you know what, human behavior is complex. purchase behavior is complex. Customer journeys are complex, and measuring with one simple signal is never a great idea, but it was there and it was available, so we used it. But looking at everything in totality makes a ton of sense. Todd, anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually think we came to the same answer from slightly different directions, because the reality is predictive analytics is exactly what we're talking about, is making um, taking insights off of a reduced set of deterministic data at the end of the day. That's exactly what we're talking about. And I did like you qualified my point about Scan and Google Privacy Sandbox. When I say they're the easy button, they're easy to roll out.
Yes.
They're not easy to generate insights from in and of themselves. So you're absolutely right. Layering on MMPs and media mix modeling on top of the insights you're getting from those platforms is critical to get to a deeper level of insight. I only say the easy button just because that's what people are going to, that's what marketers are going to start with out of the gate until they realize the limitations of the signals they're getting out of those solutions. And,
You're
then
100% right.
to
You're 100% right.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be foolish especially if you're in mobile, to say, I'm not going to look at Scan, especially Scan 4. It'd be foolish to say, I'm not going to look at Privacy Sandbox. It is deterministic. It is harder to render fraudulent. It provides some data. That's great. It would also be foolish to say, that's all I'm going to look at. You're going to use a lot of your first party data. You're going to use some of your upper funnel data in terms of click through and others. You're going to put grains of salt on all that stuff, right? But you're going to look at a lot of that stuff, and you're going to come together with this everything everywhere all at once. We've had a fascinating discussion. We have to draw it to some level of conclusion. And I think that I'll ask this as a last question. I'll send it your way first, Jess. If there was one thing that you would suggest marketers do today to prepare for the identifier scorched earth, what would it be?
If you have first party data, make sure it is usable. Validate it, make sure it's usable. That would be my first recommendation.
I sense scars from some situations that you may have encountered in that answer.
No, I'm just trying to be helpful.
Excellent. You know what? It's wonderful if you don't have to learn from your own mistakes and you can learn from other people's mistakes. This is an example. Excellent. Todd, what is your one thing you would suggest marketers do to prepare for identifier scorched earth?
My answer is a little bit more philosophical and organizational. Don't be complacent. Don't put your head in the sand. All of these companies need to prepare for this transition organizationally. That means research, understand what solutions are on the horizon, what could be relevant to you, understand how they work. You do have to get under the hood to understand whether they will match the assets that you have. And you have to be ready for this portfolio set of solutions. So complacency, we see it all the time, right? There are universal IDs out there in the ecosystem, but a lot of folks either aren't integrating with them or aren't bidding on them yet because, hey, I still have mobile ad IDs or I still have cookies to transact on. And so they're not necessarily building up a competency for how to optimize against these alternative signals in parallel so that when the other shoe does drop, they're able to flick the switch and start transacting on these new signals or new strategies.
And I just want to put a pin on that, coming from the agency world where I get a lot of vendor phone calls. Like, maybe don't pick up the phone, but answer the email. Like, people ask me all the time, and I come from the vendor side. Like, I used to work with Todd at a vendor, just for those who might not know. And that's why I've learned all I've learned. But like, answer the email. I've learned so much from actually talking to the vendors. Like, don't be a jerk to the vendors. Like, they will teach you a lot of information. They really will, because they live and breathe this every single day. So, for the agencies out there and for the brands, you can get a lot of information from your vendors. Of course, if you're our clients, please make sure we're on the phone with you. I'm kidding. But I'm just saying, you can really get a lot of information if you just answer the email and have a conversation and come prepared with some questions and help prep them. Take 5 minutes to say, this is really what I'm interested in learning, and help them devise agenda. They will teach you. They want you to learn. And that's where I've learned a lot, just by meeting with really smart vendors.
Thank you for the public service announcement, Jess.
Wonderful. Well, Todd and Jess, I have to thank you. This is the first in our Unscripted series with Amobi. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Todd.